yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah. Please tell me all the bad news, good, fill my head full of every single doubt.
Yourself
Please
to
say
that
any negative
effing
thoughts.
sport show Super Bowl runner-up Philadelphia Eagles, the last in the series for the NFC East. We are going team by team throughout every division to give you guys the records that these teams are going to end up with at the end. We have been through the NFC South, AFC North, NFC West. We are now in the NFC East, more than halfway through. And the theme has kind of been a clear division winner, the probable wild card recipient, and then the other two teams. This division, not much different. Big separation between the top and the bottom, just like the NFC as a whole, as my co-host here, Adam Hulse, has brought up on a few occasions. Dallas at the top, Philly at the top. Nobody's won this division twice in a row, which puts Philly in trouble. It makes Adam happy as a Dallas fan. The Adam Hulse. We hit Philly, and this has to be a team that you're really kind of curious about where it's going to end up, being that this is the team that's competing with your Cowboys for the division title.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, if you go back and listen to that Cowboys episode, unsurprisingly very high on the Cowboys this year, gave them a lot of wins this season. And when you just look at their record, from like where it is and where I placed them, you would think that would be enough to win this division, but Philly's going to win a whole bunch of games too. I think both of these teams are going to be battling it out this year, not just for the division, but possibly for that number one seed in the conference as well, which is why this division race is so important. There could be a situation where the winner of this division is the 1 or 2 seed, while the other team's just going to be a wild card. Big difference.
It is a big difference. Surprisingly enough, I hear a lot of question marks about Philly. Can they be as good as they were last year? But I feel like they've really only made improvements.
This is a team that, in a lot of our earlier episodes of doing this kind of show together, long before this series, we found it hard to believe that Philly would be able to retain everything they had from last year, especially with Jalen Hurts, being due that big contract. Somehow they managed to pull it off, right, for at least one more year. They gave Hurts the contract he was looking for, really didn't lose much across the board to make that happen. So they're kind of returning that NFC champion roster from last year, still with Hurts, adding DeAndre Swift, and they look primed to make another run at it.
Let's see if they can do it. We do this live. We take it game by game. None of this is laid out. We have no idea how these games are going to turn out unless we've already talked about it. We have not talked about the AFC East. So Philly at New England is new territory for us. New England's defense, fantastic. Philly still ride that high. Even though they lost the Super Bowl, I think they really, truly believe they still have a chance. I believe they have another good chance to get back. So in week 1 at New England, I think Philly rides that confidence to a win.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to give the Eagles the win here. I do a lot of times pick New England to win at home. They're always tough to beat in Foxborough, but the Eagles, I think, just too good for them to overcome.
The Eagles so good. They're in the top 10, if not the top 5 in every major category. Look, the offense was 3rd in points per game, 2nd in overall yards, 8th for the pass, 5th for the run, which, makes a lot of sense with Jalen Hurts back there. Defensively, 8th in the league for points per game, 3rd overall in yards, 5th against the pass, 16th against the run. So middle of the road against the run, but honestly, the offense so strong, they didn't need it. Per yards, they were 8th, the defense 5th overall. QB3 in Hurts accounted for 35 touchdowns to 6 interceptions last year. That is a huge stat. 13 of those 35 were on the ground. They still had RB15, wide receiver 6 with Brown. These guys are just loaded. And so it's going to be real hard to slow these guys down.
We talk so much about quarterbacks, and it's for a reason, right? Patrick Mahomes won the MVP last year. Jalen Hurts was right in that mix to win the MVP. Had he not missed the last few games of the season, maybe he would have won it. And what do you know? The 2 best quarterbacks last year were the 2 that met in the Super Bowl. So it's a big deal.
Big surprise. Minnesota in week 2. Minnesota comes to Philly. That Minnesota secondary, they were just horrible. I do expect improvement in that secondary this year. Don't get me wrong. I don't have a problem with Minnesota losing Cook, and we'll talk more about this in the Minnesota episode. I just don't think Minnesota's got enough to beat that Philly defense, especially when Philly's at home.
Minnesota, one of those weird teams, right? You see that really good record last year, but a lot of those wins were ugly. They didn't look so good winning all those games. They obviously lost Dalvin Cook this year. I'm not so high on the Vikings. I don't think they can repeat what they did last year, and Philly's just so much better. So give me the Eagles.
Week 3, they go to Tampa Bay. say, yeah, Baker Mayfield versus Jalen Hurts, and I'm going to take Jalen Hurts every single time.
Yeah, hard to disagree with that. I'm a little bit higher on Tampa this year than you are, but not high enough to pick them to beat the Eagles.
Week 4, Washington comes to Philly. You look at this, you just hear it. As we are right now, game by game. We've already talked about the Washington game. We've already talked about this matchup during the Washington episode. But if you just mention this game, you automatically think Washington's going to lose this game. Here's what you need to know. Philadelphia lost 3 games last year. One of those losses was against Washington. Now, we've both given Philly the win here. These divisional games that we've mentioned throughout this entire NFC East series, not a single one of these NFC East divisional games is a pushover for any of these teams, no matter who the opponent is.
In every division, divisional games are usually closer and sometimes the results are not what they're expected to be. I think that's even more so in the NFC East than any of those other divisions. They always play each other tough. As I mentioned before, too, with nobody ever winning this division 2 years in a row, a lot of it is because they keep beating up on each other, right? Their head-to-head games are a big reason why there's always a different champion of this division. But with all of that being said, go back and listen to the Washington episode. I do not like Washington at all this year. I think it's a mess over there. I don't think they can find a way to beat the Eagles, though they'll probably play them closer and tougher than most will give them credit for.
The Eagles went, I think it was 9-0 last year. Not a lot of change so far. They got the Rams in week 5. The Rams got cut. They might have a healthy Stafford. Probably still not enough to beat the Eagles.
If Stafford can stay healthy, the Rams can probably be better than most are expecting them to be, but they just don't have enough to beat the Eagles. As long as the Eagles are healthy and not looking past it, they'll beat the Rams.
Then they go all the way across the country to New York. They face Aaron Rodgers. I think it's fair to say this is their first big test. Philadelphia at the Jets.
It's fair to say it's their first big test. Some might say that the Vikings are a test, depending how, you feel about the Vikings. I'm not particularly high on them, but yeah, this is a tougher game. Like you said, with the travel too, they went all the way out west. Now they're coming all the way back east. The game's being played in New York. I'm going to give the Jets the win in this one.
As do I. Wins for the first 5 games. I'm sure they're going to do well as the schedule plays out, but the improved Jets, I think the Jets have a fantastic defense. We've talked about that. Aaron Rodgers has the tools around him to win this game. You're absolutely right. I think it's the travel that does them in. Then Miami comes to Philly. We mentioned this on the last show. It's going to keep coming up until we get to this Miami episode. You are definitely a lot higher on Miami. I'm really interested. You actually gave Miami the win against your Cowboys. Do they got enough to beat Philly too?
The game's in Philly. One of the more interesting storylines in this game is that Tua versus Jalen Hurts, right? That storyline goes all the way back to Alabama. Obviously Hurts getting benched for Tua in a national championship game at halftime, which Tua came back and won. I think Jalen's going to play with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder in this game. It's in Philly. I am high on the Dolphins this year, but I'm taking the Eagles in this game.
100% taking the Eagles in this one, and this is why I like doing this show. Look, Adam Hulse at Adam Hulse Sports on Twitter. Professional NFL writer is just not enough to sum up the genius of Adam Hulse when he automatically brings this stuff up. This is live. We don't break this stuff down beforehand. Hurts wants this win as much as he does any game this season to show that they made a mistake. For the game record, maybe not, but Hurts absolutely going to have a chip on his shoulder to this game and 100% wins this game in a grudge match, assuming Tua's even playing.
Good point.
We already gave Philly the win at Washington. Again, divisional games, expect a lot of splits here. It could happen. Neither of us willing to take that chance to call a split between Philly and Washington, even though it did happen last year.
I think Washington, again, they'll play Philly tougher than most people think that they will, and it's the kind of game that, take Washington with the points. That'll probably be a pretty good value bet at that point because you'll get a lot of points with Washington. I think it's unlikely they win the game, but they might keep it close.
Dallas in week 9 before the bye. If you listen to the Dallas episode, you know how this comes out. We're going to spoil it for you. Home wins for both these teams, home split for the division. So Philly taking this one in week 9, and that'll take Philly into the bye with only 1 loss to their name. So not 9-0, but 8-1, still pretty good going into the bye for the Eagles.
Yeah, we picked them all the same to this point. That really doesn't happen much if you listen to any of these other episodes. We usually disagree a lot along the way. At the halfway point with the Eagles, we're on the same page.
And then it happens. The game that so many people are looking forward to. Interesting enough, Philly coming off the bye. Philly at KC, Super Bowl rematch. Philly unable to finish in the Super Bowl. Did they learn anything? Can they get the win in a game that doesn't mean as much, but honestly could mean a lot by the end of the season?
He said, did they learn anything? And they probably just learned that it doesn't matter how much you dominate Patrick Mahomes. He's never out of it, right? Like when you watch the first half of that game, it was all Eagles. And they probably should have been up bigger on the scoreboard than they were, but the Eagles did anything they wanted on offense. Their defense played great. It looked like the Eagles were pretty much going to coast to a Super Bowl win, but Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes. You know, you give him life, you give him any chance at it, and he is always alive. Completely turned the game around at halftime. I'm sure, you know, Jalen Hurts and the Eagles are really looking forward to getting some revenge in this game. You mentioned coming off the bye week. I always say, too, the bye is a huge factor. Most head coaches have winning records coming off of bye week, but most head coaches don't have to play Patrick Mahomes coming off the bye week either in Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium in front of a crazy crowd in the Super Bowl rematch. Give me the Chiefs.
I am also taking the Chiefs. Because they're at home, because it's a rematch, I'm taking the Chiefs big because I think Philly probably did learn something about themselves. I think Kansas City did too. We're going to have a healthy Mahomes, hopefully, presumably. Here's a little secret. Kansas City's coming off the bye as well. Kansas City coming off the bye at home, Super Bowl rematch. Kansas City has something to prove too. Yes, they won, but they were on the ropes. I think Kansas City wants to show that they 100% deserve to win this game. I think they run it up. I think Kansas City wins big. I'm taking the points in this one for sure on the Kansas City side.
I like that big call. You know, like that's interesting to call it in a blowout type of game because, you know, in these quote unquote revenge type of games, you know, we always talk about, you know, the Eagles wanting to get their revenge and Jalen Hurts wanting to get their revenge. It's rare we talk about the other side of it, and it's that Mahomes and the Chiefs know that as well. They know the Eagles are coming into this game extra motivated to prove something after the Super Bowl, and they want to say, hold up, wait a second, you're not getting your revenge. We were better then, and we're still better now.
Absolutely. I cannot wait for this game. This is going to be a fun one. I know it's circled on a lot of calendars. I think we're going to get the game that we're looking for. I think you're going to be really happy to be a Kansas City fan by the end of it. In week 12, Buffalo comes to Philly. We got Philly coming off a loss. They're going to be a little defeated because they just lost to Kansas City again. And here comes Josh Allen, not letting up at all. Can Philly respond, or are they still just down?
I mean, this is tough having to play the Chiefs and the Bills back to back. You know, the two of the best teams in the AFC, two of the best teams in the NFL. And I'm actually going to give the Eagles back to back against those two AFC juggernauts. I'm taking the Bills.
It's hard to do it, but I am as well. Look, we're going to talk about this. Well, we'll just bring it up now. Before the bye, had them going 8-1. Had some nice matchups. Had the Rams on there. Tampa Bay, had Minnesota, New England, a winnable game with Miami. They play Washington twice. After the bye, they go Kansas City, Buffalo, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle, divisional matchup with the Giants. They play Arizona, and they end with a divisional matchup against the Giants. This first half and second half of the Eagles schedule, night and day, and the Eagles better be ready for it when they come out of the bye. And right now, 2 losses after the bye, we're kind of saying that they're not going to be.
We've said it many times. We can say it again. Schedules matter.
Big time, which is why we're going through this game by game live. San Francisco comes to Philly. It's West Coast traveling east, and so we give Philly the win against San Francisco at home in a close one. This is one I'm not really comfortable with. I can definitely see San Francisco winning this game.
Yeah, this is one of those games I feel about. The home team is probably who I would pick in this one, especially, you know, in late in a regular season with the two teams playing on the opposite coast because the game's in Philly. Gave it to the Eagles.
At Dallas in week 14, we gave the home splits. We already talked about that. Philly losing between weeks 11 and 14. And this is going to be a storyline if it turns out this way, which it will, because we got Adam Hulse here, so it's going to turn out exactly how we called it. Kansas City, Buffalo, San Francisco, Dallas for 11 through 14, and we have them losing 3 of those 4. And let's go ahead and get in week 15. We actually have them losing 4 of the next 5 as they face Seattle in Seattle for week 15. I mean, look, it's a tough run for anybody. The Eagles probably set up maybe the best in the NFL to face this type of run. 5 playoff teams in a row. That's rough, man.
It's a brutal stretch for sure. Going 1-4 in that stretch is probably something most would disagree with, just the way the schedule plays out. And having to cap it off in Seattle. In Seattle is a tough game for anybody. The Eagles, their travel schedule is a little tricky too, because we've talked about this a few times. They're going back and forth across the country a couple times. And during this 5-game stretch to conclude it up in Seattle, that's tough. Give me the Seahawks.
It's really tough. They go from Tampa up to Washington, not a big deal, but they go from Washington to LA, then from LA up to New York, back home. They're traveling all over the place, like you brought up. And then from Seattle, they got to travel all the way back. We've already given them the win against New York with these losses, with playoff teams, with this being a divisional game. If we weren't doing this live, if I had had a chance to go back and study the schedule, I might have given Philly a loss having to travel from Seattle all the way back to Philly to face the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, with the travel being rough, but, coming off of that losing 4 and 5 games, getting the Giants, a divisional opponent that they're very familiar with, this is kind of like that get right game, right? Like after that brutal stretch where they didn't have such a great record, I think the Giants is exactly what they need to get back on track.
And then they play Arizona and they play the Giants again. We give Philly the win in both those games. After the bye, we actually got them going 4 wins, 4 losses with the hot start at the beginning of the season, obviously enough to make the playoffs, same as the Giants did last year, starting off hot and then getting a little cooler at the end. Like we've said 100 times, you've already said it in this episode, schedule matters. Philly, great schedule up front, much tougher on the back end, still good enough to make the playoffs though.
The Eagles are definitely going to make the playoffs this year unless something catastrophic happens. I have them losing 5 games. That's probably more losses than most people are giving the Eagles this year. Obviously, a lot of hype around the Eagles, as there should be. There's no reason to not like the Eagles. And look, winning 12 games, still a very good season, and one that's definitely going to get you into the playoffs. Was 12 enough to overcome the Cowboys? That's the question.
And here's the fun part. We had them splitting against the Cowboys. So when you talk about tiebreakers, if they both finish 12 and 5, those division records are going to matter, like we've been saying this entire series with the NFC East.
Division records are going to matter. 2 games, 1 game here, 1 game there. The Cowboys lose one that they're supposed to win. The Eagles win one that they're supposed to lose, and all of a sudden they're tied up again. So every game matters in the NFL, which is why the NFL is the best.
That's why we have Adam Hulse here, because Adam Hulse is the best. At Adam Hulse Sports on Twitter. That'll take you to his Sports Kita stuff, NFL writer. We love having Adam Hulse here. We've gone through the NFC East. Adam has Dallas, the clear-cut division winner. I've got it coming down to a tiebreaker between Dallas and Philly. Either way, Dallas and Philly are the tops in this division. The Giants and the Commanders with a lot to prove. Lopsided as it is, who's going to win this one? We'll let you know as we go through division by division, game by game. Make sure you come back and check out the next episode when we hit the AFC East at That Effin' Sports Show. Wherever you listen, just throw in keyword EFIN or on YouTube. We'll see you on the next show. Have a great one.